My family took a $3,000 vacation without me, then expected me to watch their kids for free. I left at 5 a.m. and they called Child Protective Services when they found out. I'm Riley, 22 years old, and I recently graduated college with a finance degree. For as long as I can remember, my goal was simple: finish high school, go to a good college, land a decent job, and move out. Sounds straightforward, right? Well, life had other plans. After graduation, I got my degree, then moved back into my parents' home in a small Ohio town. Don't get me wrong, I love my parents, Denise and Russell. They're wonderful people who worked hard to provide a stable home for me and my sister Morgan. But moving back home wasn't exactly the dream I'd been chasing for 4 years. The plan was to stay with them for a few months while I looked for work and saved enough to get my own place. It seemed logical: no rent, free food, and a chance to regroup while planning my next steps. I told myself it was the sensible choice, even if it stung my pride a bit. Initially, things went smoothly. Within a week, I landed a job as an analyst at Western Group, a mid-sized company specializing in financial planning for small businesses. The pay wasn't fantastic, but it was consistent, and the benefits were decent. That evening, I came home, feeling like I'd taken my first real step toward independence. Mom was in the kitchen making dinner, and Dad was watching TV in the living room. I grabbed a plate, sat down, and shared the news. "I got the job," I said, thrilled. "I start Monday." For a moment, I expected excitement, congratulations, maybe even a "we're proud of you." Instead, they exchanged that look parents give right before they drop bad news. Mom put down her fork and smiled tightly. "That's great, Riley. Really, we knew you'd find something quickly." Then Dad chimed in. "We've been meaning to talk to you about something." My stomach dropped. This wasn't going to be good. Mom sighed and folded her hands on the table. "My arthritis is getting worse, so I've had to cut back my hours at the library. And your dad's hours at the auto shop have been reduced. They're even talking about more layoffs." I asked, already knowing where this was headed. "And we could really use some help with the bills," Mom said apologetically, "just until things stabilize. You wouldn't have to pay rent or anything. It's just utilities and groceries have been harder to manage." I just sat there, staring at my plate. When I moved back, I planned to contribute here and there for my own expenses, but this was more than I expected. Still, they were my parents. They'd always supported me, and they weren't asking for much. "Yeah, of course," I said, forcing a smile. "It's the least I can do." Looking back, that was the moment I should have set boundaries. But guilt is a powerful emotion. Over the next 6 months, things fell into a pattern. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, and crash. Every month, I sent my parents a big chunk of my paycheck to cover bills, groceries, and other costs. On top of that, I took on small tasks they claimed they didn't have time for, like running errands for Mom when her arthritis flared up or fixing Dad's Excel sheets because he wasn't a computer person. It wasn't just about money. I hadn't expected to sacrifice my time, energy, or patience. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a small gesture for parents who had always been there for me. But as time passed, I started noticing subtle shifts. If I mentioned wanting to save for my own place, Mom would sigh deeply and say, "It must be nice to think about moving out when the rest of us are struggling to get by." Dad was no different. He'd shake his head and say, "Some people have no idea how hard it is to make ends meet." Whenever I spend money on myself, like buying new work clothes, it wasn't just guilt. It was a complete lack of appreciation for everything I'd given up. My friends stopped inviting me out because I couldn't afford it. My desire to see the city faded each month as my savings account refused to grow. When I told Mom I was considering a second job to save faster, her only response was, "Well, just don't let it interfere with what we need." That stung. What we need. I was giving everything I had to keep this household together, but it wasn't enough. I didn't think they were being intentionally malicious. They weren't nasty or demanding, but the guilt trips were subtle and constant, like water slowly eroding a rock. Meanwhile, I started to feel trapped. I planned to stay for 3 to 6 months at most. But the more I helped, the more they seemed to rely on me. The bills kept coming, and I kept paying them, while my ideal of freedom drifted further away. Still, I told myself it was temporary. I just needed to save a little more, and I'd be done. I even started looking at city apartments, imagining what it would be like to have my own place. However, before I could take the next step, life threw me another curveball. It was a Friday evening in late spring. I had just gotten home from work and was looking forward to a peaceful night of Netflix and leftovers. Mom was in the kitchen and Dad was outside tinkering with the mower. Everything seemed normal until the doorbell rang. I opened the door to see my older sister Morgan, looking agitated. Travis, her husband, was behind her holding a bag. Their two children, Ava, 5, and Milo, 3, were running around the yard like sugar-fueled tornadoes. "Surprise!" Morgan said, flashing a big, fake smile. I stood there for a second, unsure what to say. Travis, behind her, looked tired as he carried suitcases and a duffel bag. "What's going on?" I finally asked, stepping aside as Morgan marched past me like she owned the place. "We need a place to stay for a little while," she said already. Walking toward the living room, she plopped down on the couch and groaned deeply. Travis's consulting job ended, and my boutique sales have dropped, making it tough to pay rent. You understand how things are, except I didn't. I had no idea how you let things get so bad that you pack up your entire family and show up unannounced at someone else's home. Travis finally came through the door with his arms full. "Hey, Riley," he said softly, barely making eye contact before moving their stuff upstairs. I was still standing there, unmoving, when Mom came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, my babies are here," she exclaimed, hugging Morgan. "You poor things. You've been through so much." "Don't you worry. We'll take care of everything." Dad came in a minute later, holding Milo in one arm like a football. This one nearly gave. A heart attack," he explained, running straight for the mower like it's an amusement park ride. Morgan chuckled faintly, but I noticed she didn't apologize or even tell Milo to stop. I stood there watching the scene unfold as if I were in a different universe. Within minutes, my parents were praising Morgan like she was a military hero who had survived a major fight. Mom was already talking about dinner and where they could put the kids' beds. And Dad offered to move his tools out of the spare room to create more space. Meanwhile, I remained invisible. That night, I sat in my room, trying to focus on a budget spreadsheet for work, but all I could hear was chaos downstairs.
Ava and
Milo ran up and down the hall, yelling at the top of their lungs. Morgan's voice boomed from the living room as she told Mom about her recent business issues. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that it would only be a few weeks. That should be manageable. The next morning, it was clear Morgan and Travis weren't leaving anytime soon. They unloaded all their bags, filled the spare room closet, and even took over a cabinet shelf for the children's food. And without saying anything directly, I was designated the babysitter. It started small. Morgan would casually ask me to keep an eye on Ava and Milo while she and Travis ran to the store. "It'll just be an hour," she'd say, grabbing her purse. However, that hour usually lasted 2 or 3. Weekends were the worst. On Saturday mornings, I'd wake up hoping to relax and catch up on some reading or Netflix, only to find Morgan and Travis dressed to go out. Morgan would announce, "We're meeting friends for brunch," and hand me a list of kid-friendly activities she'd printed from the internet. We shouldn't be too long. By not too long, she meant most of the day. Morgan acted as if I'd just suggested dumping the kids in a ditch when I tried to push back the first time. "Riley, it's just brunch. You don't even have plans." "What's the big deal?" I said I was planning to spend the day catching up on work, pointing to my laptop. Morgan rolled her eyes. "You're just sitting there on your computer anyway. Can't you do that with Ava and Milo in the room? You're being so dramatic." The worst part was when Mom jumped in. "Riley, honey," she said, lowering her voice as if to impart ancient wisdom. "Morgan works so hard and she deserves a little break now and then. I work hard too." I said, "But Mom just waved me off." "Of course you do. But you're single, sweetie." You don't understand how much pressure comes with having a family to take care of. It was as if my own problems were irrelevant because I didn't have a husband or children to worry about. No matter what I said, it was always about how much tougher everyone else had it. Setting boundaries would be selfish. If I begged for some space, I was making it all about myself. And when Morgan and Travis returned from their never-ending brunches or errands, they'd act like they'd just run a marathon. You don't know what it's like out there, Travis once said, sinking into the couch as if he'd spent the day digging trenches instead of sipping mimosas. I wanted to shout, I do know what it's like. I had just spent 6 hours stopping Milo from eating Play-Doh while Ava asked for a snack every 5 minutes. Of course, bringing it up would be overly whining. I spent my Saturdays watching Bluey and trying to keep Milo from throwing blocks at me while Ava demanded snacks every 5 minutes. Mom and Dad conveniently left during these extended babysitting sessions, claiming they needed to run errands or do garage tasks. When I told Morgan, later she rolled her eyes. Riley, they're just kids. It's not that hard, not too difficult. It was easy for her to say when she wasn't scrubbing crayon smears off the walls or explaining why eating Play-Doh is a bad idea. The worst part was that few people seemed to appreciate what I was doing. Morgan acted as if I was being dramatic anytime I mentioned it. Travis rarely spoke to me unless he needed something. And Mom and Dad seemed to think everything was just normal. You're such a big help, Mom said one evening after I mentioned how tired I was. It's good practice for when you have kids someday. The constant guilt trips were starting to wear me down. Every time I thought about saying no or setting stronger limits, I remembered Mom's words, family helps family. So, what about me? Didn't I deserve to live my own life? It wasn't just babysitting either. My salary, which had previously been enough to cover the costs for 3 people, was now stretched thin with 5 more mouths to feed. The cost of groceries and utilities doubled overnight. I tried to bring it up one evening after dinner. Hey, Morgan, would you and Travis be able to chip in for groceries this week? She looked at me as if I'd asked her to donate a kidney. We're barely scraping by as it is, Riley. You know that. Travis nodded in agreement. It's tough out there, right? Now, I bit my tongue and let it go. But inside, I was enraged. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home. My bedroom became the only place I could hide, but even that wasn't safe. Ava and Milo had fun breaking in unexpectedly and dumping toys and crumbs everywhere. Everyone but me realized this wasn't a temporary situation. Morgan and Travis were becoming overly comfortable, and I was paying the price, both financially and emotionally. I should have spoken up earlier, but every time I did, I felt like the bad guy. I was repeatedly told that I was overreacting or being selfish, so I remained silent. Then, one evening, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but living in a house with people who don't grasp the concept of an indoor voice makes it impossible not to. I was sitting in my room one evening, scrolling through job postings to distract myself from the chaos downstairs when I heard the end of Mom's phone call. Yes, we're all going to Florida next weekend for Celesta's retirement celebration. It'll be so nice to have the whole family together for a proper send-off, she said with a grin. I froze. Florida? Retirement celebration? Whole family. I stood up and moved into the hallway, craning my neck to see if I had misheard. Mom was still on the phone, pacing in the kitchen, her back to me. Of course Riley will be here to watch the kids. It just makes sense. No point in dragging them along to something they wouldn't enjoy. There it was. Except for myself. The whole family would go to Florida. Apparently, I had already offered to stay behind and babysit. I went back to my room, thinking, how could they just forget me? The more I thought about it, the angrier I grew. Not only was I not informed about the trip, but they didn't even consider including me. I wasn't invited, wasn't asked if I could babysit, and wasn't given any prior notice. They just assumed because that's what my family did. The ensuing days were filled with frustration and awkward silence. Morgan was busy shopping for vacation clothes, flaunting her new swimsuit and flip-flops around the house while Ava and Milo wreaked havoc in the living room. Travis spoke constantly about how much he was looking forward to relaxing on the beach. Mom, meanwhile, was in full planning mode, making vacation arrangements and double-checking her packing list. Dad, of course, agreed with everything she said, nodding when necessary but adding little more than an occasional grunt of agreement. Nobody addressed the fact that I wasn't going. I tried to bring it up gently during dinner one night. "So, when were you all planning to tell me about Florida?" I asked, stabbing at my salad. Mom glanced at me with amazement. "Oh, I thought Morgan told you." Morgan didn't even look up from her plate. "I assumed you knew." "Mom's been talking about it for weeks." For weeks, I wanted to shout. Weeks passed, and no one thought to speak to me. "So, what's the plan?" I asked, trying to appear calm. "You all head to Florida, and I just stay here with the kids." "Well, yes," Mom responded matter-of-factly. "It just makes the most sense. The kids wouldn't enjoy a retirement party, and someone needs to stay behind to look after them. You're so good with Ava and Milo, and it's not like you'd want to come anyway." That last part stung. "Why wouldn't I want to come?" I asked, trying to maintain a calm tone. Morgan slowly looked up, her expression somewhere between pity and irritation. "It's a family trip, Riley, adults only. You wouldn't even know anyone there besides Aunt Celeste, and it's not like you're close to her." Dad chimed in, trying to calm things down. "We just figured this was the best arrangement for everyone. You'll have the house to yourself for a few days. Peace and quiet." Was he serious? How relaxing would it be to chase two hyperactive kids all weekend while the rest of the family sipped margaritas on the beach? After that, I ended the conversation. It was clear that they had already made up their minds, and nothing I said would change that. As the days passed, I began to feel like an outsider in my own family. The enthusiasm in the house was palpable. Morgan and Mom were continuously talking about clothes, plans, and which restaurants they would visit in Florida. Travis, who rarely displayed emotion beyond mild annoyance, appeared genuinely excited about the trip. Meanwhile, I remained invisible. However, this pattern wasn't exclusive to the Florida vacation. Morgan was always the center of attention when we were kids. She was the cheerleading captain, and her accomplishments were recognized with balloons and banners. I was the nerdy one. But it didn't matter because Morgan's trophies adorned the shelves, and her face was prominently displayed in every family photo. Years later, nothing had changed. Morgan was still the golden child, and I was still the afterthought, the person they called when they needed something. The one they relied on but never fully appreciated. I tried to distract myself by focusing on work. But it was hard to concentrate with Ava and Milo constantly barging into my room or shrieking at each other about toys. Morgan's parenting method appeared to involve handing the kids an iPad and letting them run wild. Travis wasn't doing much better. He'd sit on the couch and check his phone as chaos erupted around him. But things started to shift one afternoon, when I overheard Morgan talking to Mom in the kitchen. "It's just so nice to have Riley around," she gushed. "I don't know what we'd do without her taking care of the kids. She's like the glue holding everything together." This is exactly what I was to them, not a person with my own life and goals, but rather the glue that holds theirs together. That's when I understood I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't continue to sacrifice my happiness and freedom for a family that took me for granted. I spent the rest of the week preparing my escape. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. If they could arrange a trip without informing me, I could plan my own. I tried to think of where I'd go. Then I remembered that one of my undergrad friends, Brooke, had mentioned going camping that weekend. She and a few others were heading to Blue Ridge Falls, and she had invited me. I'd declined, figuring I'd be stuck at home babysitting. But suddenly, it felt like a terrific opportunity. I texted Brooke that night, "Is there still room on the trip this weekend?" Her reply arrived almost instantly. "Of course. We're leaving early Saturday morning. You in?" I looked at my phone for a moment before responding, "I'm in." The decision felt liberating. I was finally putting myself first. And this was no ordinary camping trip. It was a lifeline, a chance to get out of the house and away from the chaos that had consumed my life. However, it would be tough to pull off. My family had a knack for sniffing out anything that didn't revolve around them. And if they discovered I was planning something for me, it was over before it even began. I had to be smart about this. The days leading up to Saturday were tense. Morgan was in full holiday mode, parading about the house with new beach hats and a playlist she insisted on blasting at high volume. Travis spent most of his time tinkering with the children's car seats and complaining about how much luggage they needed to fit into the trunk. Meanwhile, Mom rushed around with a clipboard, double-checking the packing list. "Riley, don't forget Ava likes her milk warmed before bed," she said, as if I hadn't heard it 3 times before. "Oh, and Milo's picky about his pajamas. Make sure he's in the blue ones." I nodded, biting my tongue to prevent saying something I could regret. There was no point in arguing. I had already volunteered to be the weekend babysitter, and nothing I said would change their minds. By Friday night, the house looked like a zoo. Mom and Morgan were deciding which foods to bring. Travis was attempting to mend a squeaky luggage wheel as the children ran around the living room like miniature hurricanes. Dad, as usual, had gone to the garage to check on the tools, which I assumed was code for fleeing the commotion. I watched it all from the kitchen, silently drinking my tea and counting down the hours until morning. Around 10 p.m., everything started to calm down. Mom put the kids to bed, Morgan went upstairs to pack her last few items, and Travis lay down on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I waited until the house was completely silent before entering my room and grabbing my duffel bag. I'd been packing slowly all week to avoid suspicion, putting my hiking boots and clothes at the back of my wardrobe. I carefully packed my toothbrush, flashlight, and a few snacks before zipping it up. My heart was racing with anticipation, rather than dread. This wasn't just about camping. It was about regaining control of my life. My alarm rang at 5 a.m. sharp. I got out of bed, grabbed my duffel bag, and tiptoed to the door. The house was exceptionally quiet, the type of quietness that only occurs in the early hours of the morning. I held my breath as I opened the front door, cringing as it creaked more than expected. I froze for a second, waiting for someone to call after me, but nothing happened. The air outside was cool and refreshing. I took one last look at the darkened house before getting into my car and starting it. As I backed out of the driveway, I felt a sense of relief. I was free. The journey to Blue Ridge Falls was both peaceful and pleasant. The farther I drove from home, the lighter I felt. I turned on the radio and relaxed for the first time in what seemed like months. Although I kept thinking about how my family would react when they woke up, I tried to distract myself and focus solely on me. Brooke had texted me the camping location, and when I arrived, the sun had fully risen. She was already there, unloading her car and setting up her tent. "Hey, you made it," she exclaimed, waving as I parked beside her. "Of course," I responded. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." The campsite was just secluded enough to feel like a real escape, but not so far away that we couldn't find a good hiking trail or two. Brooke introduced me to the rest of the group, which included her college classmates and co-workers. Everyone seemed friendly and easygoing with few questions. We spent the morning setting up tents, gathering firewood, and deciding which paths to explore. By midday, we were deep in the woods. It was unusual to be surrounded by nature instead of screaming children and constant demands. Brooke and I settled into a relaxed rhythm, discussing work, life, and everything in between. She didn't ask about my family, and I didn't offer. This excursion wasn't about them. It was about me. That evening, we gathered around the campfire to roast marshmallows and tell stories. "This is exactly what I needed," I said, relaxing in my camp chair and enjoying the warmth of the fire. "Same," Brooke replied, adding another log to the fire. "We should do this more often. Just get away from everything, you know?" I nodded and stared at the flames. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely calm. Nobody asked me for favors. Nobody was guilt-tripping me. No one asked me to sacrifice my time and energy for their benefit. As the night went on, I found myself laughing harder than I had in ages. It wasn't just the jokes or anecdotes. It was the feeling of being surrounded by people who didn't demand anything from me. During this time, I didn't check my phone once. When we returned to the campsite that evening from our hike, I was tired in the best way possible. My legs hurt. My face was sunburnt, and my heart felt lighter than it had in months. I was no longer concerned about my family's expectations or constant demands. I was contemplating what I wanted, where I was going, and how I would get there. That is, until I opened the front door. The house was a mess. Toy dinosaurs, crayons, and what looked to be an empty cereal bag were sprawled across the couch. The faint smell of something burning lingered in the air, and I could hear voices coming from the living room. "Riley's here," Mom replied. Her voice wasn't as warm as usual. It seemed sharp, like she was about to unleash something on me. I left my duffel bag at the door and entered the living room. Mom, Morgan, Travis, and Dad were sitting together, their faces flushed with anger. Ava was screaming loudly, and Milo was curled up on the floor holding a juice box. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's going on?" Morgan said, standing up and pointing at me. "You disappeared without telling anyone. That's what's going on." I told you I wasn't babysitting this weekend, I replied, crossing my arms. "You didn't tell us where you were going or what the hell you were doing," Mom screamed, flushed. "I'm an adult. I don't need to check in," I said, my patience fraying. "Well, when we realized you weren't here with the kids, we panicked," Travis chimed in. Panic was not even close to describing it. They said they were shocked when they discovered I wasn't at home on Saturday morning. My car was gone, my room was empty, and I had left no notes. Instead of assuming I had gone somewhere or taken a much-needed break, they immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario. "We thought something had happened to you," Mom said, her voice quivering. "We even called CPS. That stopped me in my tracks." "You called CPS for what?" "For abandoning the kids." Morgan cried as if it were the most obvious thing on the planet. "First of all," I replied, waving my hand to interrupt her, "I never agreed to watch your kids this weekend. You all decided that on your own, without consulting me. Second, calling CPS on me for not being here is insane. What exactly did you tell them?" "Hi, we wanted to abandon our own kids with someone who didn't agree to it, but now she's not home, so please arrest her." "Did they laugh before or after they hung up on you?" "That's insane." "It wasn't insane when we didn't know where you were," Mom exclaimed. I couldn't take their foolishness anymore. "So what happened when CPS showed up?" "They left after we explained everything," Morgan said softly. "But do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" "Embarrassing?" I questioned, my voice rising. "You called CPS because I didn't stick around to babysit your kids, and you're worried about embarrassment." The argument escalated from there. Morgan accused me of being selfish and irresponsible. Travis mentioned something about how I had let everyone down. Mom continued to mention how I had abandoned my family. Dad, of course, sat there shaking his head in disappointment, as he frequently did when things didn't go as planned. By the time the yelling ended, I was too tired to fight. I took my duffel bag and went upstairs to my room, closing the door behind me. The chaos remained until Monday. I left for work early, not wanting to deal with any more guilt trips or accusations. However, my phone was already inundated with texts. "Mom, we need to talk about your behavior this weekend." "Morgan, Riley, you totally screwed us over." "Travis, you owe the family an apology." I ignored them all. At work, I tried to focus, but the stress of the weekend hovered over me. My coworkers could tell something was wrong, but I wasn't about to unload my family drama in the break room. By the time I got home that evening, I was ready for round 2. Mom was waiting for me in the kitchen the moment I entered. "We need to talk," she said, folding her arms. "I'm tired," I told her, attempting to walk by. "Riley," she said firmly, blocking my path, "this can't wait." I grimaced and set my luggage down. "What now?" Mom's face softened, but her voice remained severe. "Your sister is hurt. She feels like you abandoned her when she needed you most." I looked at her bewildered. She needed me for what? To babysit her kids while she went on vacation?
That's
Not my responsibility, Mom. You should do your part as a member of this family, she said, her voice full of anguish. Funny how that only applies to me, I commented. When has Morgan ever helped me? When has anyone helped me? Mom opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Exactly, I replied, gathering my suitcase and heading upstairs. The next few days were tense. Morgan hardly spoke to me, and when she did, she only made passive-aggressive comments about how difficult it is to find good babysitters these days. Travis stayed out of it, which was probably a good thing, but his silence was nearly as unpleasant as the arguing. Mom and Dad tried to act as if nothing had happened, but each conversation was loaded with unspoken regret. "We're a family," Mom would say at random, as if that was enough to solve everything. I realized I couldn't remain much longer. The house felt more oppressive than ever, and no amount of space or time could improve the situation. One evening when I was folding laundry, Dad knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" he asked, his tone quieter than usual. "Sure," I said, even though I was not in the mood for another lecture. He stepped in and sat on the edge of my bed, staring down at his hands. "Look, I know things have been tough lately, and I know you feel like we've been unfair to you." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "But your mom and I are just trying to keep everyone together. This family's been through a lot, and we're all trying to do our best." "Dad, I understand," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But I can't keep sacrificing my life for everyone else. I'm 22. I should be building my future, not cleaning up after Morgan and Travis." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he didn't quite understand. "We'll figure this out," he said after a long pause. "Just give it some time." I nodded, but I knew deep down that time would not make this better. By the end of the week, I had made a decision. It was time to leave. The house no longer felt like a home, but more like a war zone. I knew if I stayed too long, I'd lose what little sanity I had left. I began searching for apartments. After months of paying bills that weren't mine, my savings were small, but they were enough to get me started. I found a handful of listings that looked promising. Nothing extraordinary, just clean and tiny. I looked at my phone for a moment before calling Aunt Celeste. She picked up on the second ring. "Riley, how are you, sweetheart?" she inquired, her tone warm and sympathetic. "Hey, Aunt Celeste." "I'm okay, I guess," I responded, unsure how to start this conversation. She recognized my hesitant tone right away. "What's going on? Is everything all right?" "Not really," I admitted. "I don't know if you heard, but I didn't go to your retirement trip." "I noticed," she said. "Your mom said you were staying behind to help with the kids." I thought that sounded odd. "Why didn't you come?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Because no one told me about it. They just assumed I'd babysit, like always." Aunt Celeste remained silent for a moment before drawing a rapid breath. "That doesn't surprise me, unfortunately. Your mom mentioned how much you've been helping out, but it sounds like they've been taking advantage of you." "Yeah, you could say that," I answered. "I'm actually thinking about moving out, but I'm not sure how to handle the fallout." "Well, sweetheart, you've done more than enough. You're young. You shouldn't be tied down like this. Move out, set boundaries, and let them figure out their own mess. It's not your responsibility to fix everything for them." Hearing those words felt like a weight was lifted off my chest. She added forcefully, "And if you need help, let me know. You deserve better than this." That conversation gave me the motivation I needed. The following morning, I informed the landlord that I would no longer be paying rent starting next month and that my parents would have to take over. I hesitated to take this step, but I knew it was necessary. After that, I spent the
day packing.
I didn't bother alerting anyone. There was no use in starting another dispute until I was ready to depart. I packed all I could fit into my car, and the rest could wait. That evening, I arrived downstairs for dinner, ready to drop the bomb. The tension was already high. Morgan had rarely spoken to me this week, and Mom had loomed like a dark cloud. "Can we talk?" I asked, putting down my fork. Mom looked up, wary. "What is it, Riley?" I stated plainly, I am moving out. The silence was awful. Morgan's fork clattered on her plate, and Mom's jaw dropped. Even Dad was surprised, but he quickly hid it with his usual grin. You're what? Mom asked, her voice shaking. I'm moving. Out, I repeated again. I've already found a place, and I'll be leaving by the end of the weekend. But you can't just leave. Mom said, her voice rising. We need you here. The bills, the kids. It is not my responsibility, I explained. I've been paying for this house, babysitting Morgan's kids, and putting my life on hold for months. It's time for me to live my own life, Morgan scoffed. Wow, so you're just going to abandon us? How selfish can you be? I turned to her, my patience worn out. Selfish, Morgan? You've been living here rent-free, dumping your kids on me every chance you get, and contributing absolutely nothing. If anyone's selfish, it's you. That's enough, Riley, Dad said sternly. No, it's not enough, I replied. I've done everything you've asked and more, and all I've gotten in return is guilt trips and disrespect. I'm done. Mom's face crumpled, but I didn't let it bother me. I've already told the landlord I won't be contributing to the rent anymore, I said. So you'll need to figure that out too. Morgan appeared to be about to erupt. Are you kidding me? You're just going to leave us with all the bills. How are we supposed to manage without you? Not my problem, I said, echoing her own words from months before. The next morning, I'd packed the rest of my belongings into my car. Mom stood on the porch looking sad but saying nothing. Dad stayed inside, avoiding the entire scene. Morgan didn't even bother to come downstairs. As I pulled out of the driveway, I had a variety of emotions, but overall, I felt liberated. The first few days in my new apartment felt surreal. Mom called several times, but I didn't respond. I wasn't prepared to deal with her yet. Morgan wrote me several angry texts accusing me of abandoning the family, so I blocked her number.
Aunt.
Celeste called to check in. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, she said. It's not easy to stand up for yourself, especially with family, but you did the right thing.
Thanks, Aunt Celeste, I said, smiling. I think so too.
It's been a few months, and things are starting to feel normal. I've reunited with old friends, started new hobbies, and even begun saving for a trip to Europe next year. I have kept a distance from my relatives. Mom still sends me the occasional guilt-inducing text, but I've stopped letting it bother me. Morgan and I haven't communicated since I left, and I am fine with that. I understand they need to change, but it is no longer my responsibility, and I've spent enough of my life putting them first. It is time to prioritize myself for a change. And you know what? I don't regret it.